as Bill has pointed out, the Doolittle raid took place in 1942. So I intend to have serious words with the person that did this PowerPoint, which is okay because I talk to myself all the time. That will not be a problem. I wanted to start off, we need heroes. And the human animal likes nothing more than a good story. And if that good story includes heroes, all the more better. And I want to mention quickly, and I don't want to discuss it, I just want to mention it quickly. I'm saddened today because the statues of General Beauregard, Jeff Davis, and Robert E. Lee are being removed in New Orleans. And for anyone to look at the life, sacrifice, and dedication of Robert E. Lee in particular and say, we cannot have a statue of this man in our city, it does something less than honorable to our city, I am flabbergasted. So I just wanted to start off by saying that. Tonight we're going to talk about heroes. We're going to talk about some of the most extraordinary heroes that have ever lived. And as we talk, I want you to think, what would you have done if you were in their situation? If somebody said, none of you have ever been to war, but you're going to do something no one's ever done before. You're going to take bombers off carriers. Only 16 small bombers are going to attack the Japanese Empire. 80 people. You know, when you talk about battles in World War II, especially when you talk about the Russian front, you're talking about millions fighting millions. Here we're talking about 80 against the Empire of Japan. It's just extraordinary. A few years ago, my wife and I had the sheer pleasure of going for a ride in a B-25. And I gotta tell you, the whole time we're up in the air, I'm thinking about these guys taking off of carriers and flying all this distance and all this way, and I just continually shook my head at the courage and the dedication and the willingness to sacrifice all to do what they did. Pearl Harbor. We talked about this a few months back. How do we come back from this? The Japanese are so powerful in the Pacific. Their Kido Butai, their collection of aircraft carriers, especially their main striking fleet of 6 carriers. How do we fight against that? Our battleships are sunk and we only have a few carriers that we can do anything with. Franklin Roosevelt wants to do something sooner rather than later. We got to hit back. But what are we going to do? We can't launch from the Soviet Union. Stalin, no way, not going to happen. The Chinese areas that are close enough to launch are occupied by Japan. That's not going to happen. If we try to attack Japan with fighters and bombers off of our carriers, we have to get our carriers to within 300 miles of the Japanese coast. Even at that, that's pretty long range to launch an attack and get them back. The most valuable asset we have in the Pacific in 1942 is our aircraft carriers. Not an option, can't do it. Well, enter the frog. A frog with a plan. Captain Frog Lowe is a submariner on Admiral King's staff. Admiral King is the Chief of Naval Operations. As he's flying over Norfolk, he looks down and they had painted the outline of a carrier deck so that the Army Air Force bombers could practice bombing it. So they would see the size and shape of the carrier deck. Well, simultaneously, he sees twin-engine Army Air Force bombers in the air. And his brain makes the connection. Ooh, could these planes take off from a carrier deck that size? That's the genesis of the plan. Now, who's going to put this plan together? Who could we possibly find? Who can handle the engineering and the physics to see if all of this is feasible? Who knows enough of that aircraft to select the best twin engine bomber? Because we've got several. Who has a PhD in aeronautical engineering from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology? Who has always pushed the aviation envelope? And oh, and by the way, how convenient. He's a colonel in the Army Air Force. Who is this guy? Jimmy Doolittle. Who else? When it comes to choosing who's going to organize this, who's going to make it happen, there was nobody else in the running. He's the man. Doolittle, very methodically, sets about solving problem after problem after problem, one at a time. And it's not all him, he's got help. But, you know, China gives permission. The planes can land in China. Part of the reason Chiang Kai-shek agrees to this is the 16 B-25 bombers that are going to carry out the raid will land in China, and then they will belong to Chiang Kai-shek. So he will have his own little air force that he can then use against the Japanese. 18 B-25s are sent to Minnesota for modification. They do everything to give them as much range as they possibly can. They take out the bottom turret. They put in blisters for additional fuel. They take out, if you saw the movie Pearl Harbor, where they take out the machine guns at the very last minute, nope, they did that right from the beginning. Took out the machine guns and replaced them with wooden sticks painted black so people would think they had machine guns. This was all done right off the bat. Also, if you saw Pearl Harbor, you got people from all kinds of different organizations, including Ben Affleck and what's his name? I forget. Who had never been near a B-25, but suddenly they're going to be B-25 pilots. And that's not what happened. 17th Bomb Group, who flew B-25s, were approached. We needed sufficient numbers of volunteers. Josh Hartnett, there we go. This beautiful young lady, I have no idea who she is, help out here. Enough of them volunteered that they had more than enough folks to go on this mission. And they were volunteering to do something that they had absolutely no idea what they were doing. But they said, secret, dangerous, hit back to the Japanese, take me, I'm in. Eglin Field, the crews are taught how to take off in a very short distance. Instead of 3,000 feet, 500 feet. And they have a naval expert, Lieutenant Henry Miller, that teaches them how to do it. Now, as I'm talking about this, I'm going to keep this picture up because this shows General, well at the time, Colonel Jimmy Doolittle on the deck of the Hornet with all the guys who were going to fly the mission. This was never supposed to happen. Doolittle was not supposed to actually go on the mission. He's too valuable. I mean, he's the brains of the operation. He's the guy that can solve problems. He's on Hap Arnold's staff. Hap Arnold is the head of the Army Air Corps. He was never intended to go on the mission. Doolittle tricks Arnold. This is what he did. These are in Doolittle's words. On one of my trips to Washington in mid-March, I drop in to see Hap Arnold and report the progress we're making. Toward the end of our conversation, I said, General, it occurred to me that I'm the one guy in this project who knows more about it than anybody else. You asked me to get the planes modified and the crews trained, and this is being done. They're the finest bunch of boys I've ever worked with. I'd like your authorization to lead the mission myself. Hap stared at me and his ever-present smile disappeared. He knew I had missed combat in World War I, just as he had, and understood from my previous request when I was in Detroit that I didn't want to miss this war. He shook his head and said, "I'm sorry, Jim, I need you here on my staff. I can't afford to let you go on every mission you might help to plan." I thought he was going to say that, so I launched into a rapid-fire sales pitch I'd mentally prepared beforehand. Finally, Hap gave in. He shrugged and said, "All right, Jim, it's all right with me, provided it's all right with Miff Harmon." Miff was Brigadier General Millard F. Harmon, Jr., Hap's chief of staff. I smelled a rat. So I saluted, about-faced, and ran down the corridor to Miff's office. I knocked and opened the door. "Miff," I said breathlessly, "I've just been to see Hap about that project I've been working on and said I wanted to lead the mission. Hap said it was okay with him if it's okay with you." Miff was caught flat-footed, which was just what I had intended. He replied, "Well, if it's all right with Hap, it's certainly all right with me." I thanked him and closed the door. Just as I did, I heard Hap's voice on Miff's squawk box. Miff said plaintively, "But Hap, I told him he could go." I didn't want to hear any more. I beat it back to Bowling Field, got into my B-25, and headed for Eglin. Doolittle literally hid out for a couple of days, just in case Hap was going to call him and say, "Well, you tricked me, but you're still not going." That's how Doolittle got to go. Again, heroes, nobody would have said a word if Doolittle had done all the thinking, all the planning, and didn't actually go. But there was no way he was going to go. This is what was supposed to happen, okay? USS Hornet, escorted by the USS Enterprise, takes 16 B-25 bombers to about 300-400 miles off Japan. Now, they're going to launch at such a time that the bombers will be over Japan at night. Much less chance that the anti-aircraft fire will be good, that the Japanese will come up with fighters and meet them. Doolittle, in the lead bomber, will drop incendiaries to light the targets. Targets are Tokyo, Kanagawa, Yokohama, Kobe, Osaka, and Nagoya. The planes, after they bomb Japan, will have enough fuel to fly to China, where a prearranged homing beacon will be at the airfield in China that they're supposed to land. So all they have to do is home in on the beacon and they'll be fine. That's what's supposed to happen. This is what it looked like as they're en route. For such a secret plan, when they left out of San Francisco, everybody could see 16 B-25 bombers on the deck. Now, this is the course of action if things don't go according to plan, based on how close the Hornet is to Japan when things go sideways. If they get to within 400 miles, yeah, they can follow the plan. If they get close enough to bomb Japan, even if they're not going to really make it to China, they'll bomb Japan, crash, ditch planes in China or at sea. Part of that scenario was get close enough to ditch at sea and get picked up by American submarines. Now, if we don't get that close at all, turn it around and go back. Take the B-25s back to Hawaii or Midway. Now, if they got too close to Japan and the Japanese were alerted, well, in order to defend the Enterprise, you need the fighters that are inside the ship. Well, you can't bring them up to the flight deck and have them take off if it's full of B-25s. So you push the B-25s overboard, bring the fighters up, and fight off the Japanese. So these are all the possible scenarios. Actual picture of B-25 taking off from the Hornet. Note the broomstick handles out the back. April 18th, 1942, plan falls apart. 3 a.m., 2 small ships are spotted only 11 miles away. How that happened with radar and somebody wasn't looking. 5:58 a.m., the Japanese picket boats are actually spotted. The Japanese have picket boats hundreds of miles away from Japan just in case we try something. 7:38 a.m., the Japanese boats report 3 carriers spotted. Now it's only 2, but still, the word is out. Now it's 9 hours. I actually read recently it was 10 hours from the planned launch. It's not nearly close enough, and the planes aren't going to get there at night. So what do? You go anyway. This is where it's not just about the plan. It's not just about the planes. It's not just about the fleet. It's about 80 guys who are willing to go on what virtually should have been a suicide mission, because that's what this nation needed at that moment in time. Homing beacon isn't there, so these guys take off knowing as close a thing as it was going to be if everything worked out the way it was supposed to work out. Now, things aren't looking so good. What it would have looked like. And these planes, 80 men, 16 planes, 5 guys on each plane. It's not like a B-17 with a crew of 10. 5 guys, not many. This is the raid itself and what happened. First of all, the Japanese, even though they know the carriers are coming, they're thinking, well, it's going to be a traditional carrier attack, so they've got to get within 300 miles or less. So the Japanese are thinking it's going to be at least another whole day before anything from these carriers is going to hit Japan. So the Japanese are caught flat-footed. The B-25s are hit by ground fire and fighters, and they sustain some damage. No losses, which is amazing when you think about it. All the targets are successfully bombed, and something I'll talk about more in a second, but I just want to mention it now. The prevailing wisdom for years has been, well, this was a great morale boost, but we really didn't do any damage. We did damage. We did a lot of damage. And part of that is we hit 2 Japanese ships that were knocked out of action. So this was not just a morale booster, they did some serious stuff. Now here's the thing. When you look at, is the big guy just kind of watching what's going on, or does he help sometimes? The prevailing winds go from China to Japan. So in other words, our guys, after they bomb Japan, they should be going into a headwind, which means their ability to stretch the miles and get to China, no way. On this day, the prevailing winds changed. So the prevailing winds went from Japan to China. Our guys had a tailwind. Without the tailwind, they don't make it. Big guy, coincidence, you decide. One plane had real fuel problems, so they weren't supposed to, but they did. They diverted to Russia. Of the 16 planes, they're the only plane that actually landed. And Stalin, good guy that he was, interned them. And 13 months later, they escaped back to the West through Iran. That's what happened to those 5 guys. Image of a couple B-25s over Japan itself. Now, this is what happens to the crews. Of the 15 that make it to China, 11 of them bail out. In other words, we're high enough that you can jump out and parachute. 11 of them chose to do that. Of those 55 guys, 1 was killed. And again, think about this. How many times have these guys been in battle? Never. How many times have these guys jumped out of a plane? Never. Over unknown territory, under hostile territory. Think about that. The fact that 55 guys jumped out of their planes, not knowing where they were or anything, and only 1 was killed, it's amazing. 4 of the B-25s crash landed. They didn't try to jump. They rode it in. Of those, 2 of the crewmen were killed. They crash landed into the water. They couldn't get out of the plane. They went down with the plane. 8 crew members are captured by the Japanese. 4 are executed. 1 of them is starved to death. So 3 of them survived the war. 1 of them was so badly tortured, he's never the same again. 64 Americans aren't captured, aren't killed. At least 1, Lawson, is so badly wounded he winds up losing his leg. So not only are the Chinese helping him escape, they're literally carrying him from town to town to get him out. But 64 Americans of the 80 make it out of China. Picture taken of a couple of the crew in China. Now this is a picture of Doolittle's airplane. And this is the account of what Doolittle was thinking at the time after his plane crashed. He hadn't linked up with the other crew yet. It's just him and his crashed plane and his crew. This is, again, in his own words. I sat beside a wing and looked around at the thousands of pieces of shattered metal that had once been a beautiful airplane. I felt lower than a frog's posterior. This was my first combat mission. I had planned it from the beginning and led it. I was sure it was my last. As far as I was concerned, it was a failure, and I felt there could be no future for me in uniform now. Even if we had successfully accomplished the first half of our mission, the second half had been to deliver the B-25s to our units in the China, Burma, India theater of operations. My main concern was for my men. What had happened to my crew probably had happened to the others. If so, they had to be scattered all over a considerable area of China. How many had survived? Had any been taken prisoner by the Japanese? Did any have to ditch in the China Sea? As I sat there, Paul Leonard took my picture, and then seeing how badly I felt, tried to cheer me up. He said, "What do you think will happen when you get home, Colonel?" I answered, "Well, I guess they'll court-martial me and send me to prison at Fort Leavenworth." Paul said, "No, sir. I'll tell you what will happen. They're going to make you a general." I smiled weakly, and he tried again. "And they're going to give you the Congressional Medal of Honor." I smiled again, and he made a final effort. "Colonel, I know they're going to give you another airplane, and when they do, I'd like to fly with you as your crew chief." It was then the tears came to my eyes. It was the supreme compliment that a mechanic could give a pilot. It meant he was so sure of the skills of the pilot that he would fly anywhere with him under any circumstances. I thanked him and said that if I ever had another airplane and he wanted to be my crew chief, he surely would. Unfortunately, and to me, this is the part of the story that most Americans don't know about, and this is the most tragic part of the story. The Japanese were furious at the raid. Their emperor lived in Tokyo. My gosh, we might have killed their emperor, their god. The Japanese knew the Chinese had helped the 64 Americans escape. For starters, Japanese troops destroyed Nanchang, a city of 50,000 people. The Chinese people, who they thought, they didn't even have to have proof, had helped the raiders, were tortured to death in the most gruesome fashion. Not going to share that. The Japanese laid waste to a 20,000 square mile area of China in reprisal for China helping 64 Americans escape. Before they were through, the Japanese killed at least 250,000 Chinese because 64 Doolittle raiders escaped from China. Let's put that number in perspective. The United States lost 400,000 dead in all of World War II. Every battle. Pearl Harbor, Midway, Coral Sea, Leyte Gulf, D-Day, Battle of the Bulge, North Africa. 400,000 to beat Germany and Japan. The Japanese killed 250,000 Chinese because they were unhappy at what the Chinese had done. Let's put it into another perspective. How many Confederate soldiers were lost in the Civil War? Estimate is around 260,000, right in the neighborhood of 250,000. So all the men that were lost by the South in the Civil War is about the same as the Chinese people that were slaughtered by the Japanese. Think about that when we have a conversation about should we have used the atomic bomb. Now, what were the results of the Doolittle raid, all told? Well, before I go to the next slide, what happened to Jimmy Doolittle when he gets back to Washington? As soon as he gets back, somebody comes and picks him up. They've got a uniform for him. And they said, Colonel, put on the uniform. He was a lieutenant colonel at the time. Where are we going? Oh, you'll find out. They drove him to the White House. He walks in, there's Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and there's also Doolittle's wife. And Doolittle's thinking, how mean can these guys be? They're going to fire me in front of my wife? They're going to humiliate me and court-martial me, and my wife has to see this? And of course, that's not what happened. Just like his crew chief had predicted, he was given the Medal of Honor, and he was promoted to Brigadier General, which means he skipped full colonel. He went from Lieutenant Colonel to Brigadier General. So that's what happened to Doolittle when he got back. The raid accomplished everything that we could have hoped for. Like I said, we did more damage than we had anticipated. American morale is tremendously boosted. When the press asked FDR, where did the bombers come from? How did the bombers get to bomb Japan? And he said, they took off from Shangri-La, which was part of a movie that was playing at the time, this mythical place called Shangri-La. Japanese leaders are out of their minds because of this. Again, their emperor's life was put in jeopardy. They had talked about a battle involving Midway, where they would take Midway Island, which was so close to Pearl Harbor that the American fleet, what was left of it, would be drawn out, and then the Japanese would destroy the entire American fleet in one grand battle, which is the Japanese way of war. After the Doolittle raid, Midway is full speed ahead. We're doing it. As it turns out, and if you come see us again in June, Midway's the turning point. So the fact that the Doolittle raid helped propel the Japanese to do something that was rash was huge. So it didn't just build up our morale, didn't just make the Japanese angry, didn't do some damage. It set things in motion to turn the tide in the Pacific War. Doolittle goes on to have a lot of assignments. His most important assignment was he was the general in charge of the 8th Air Force in Europe. So he is a very significant person in the Army Air Forces and the destruction of the German Luftwaffe. This is Doolittle's crew, the guys that he flew with. This gentleman is Dick Cole. Why is Dick Cole important? This was Dick Cole in 1942. This is Dick Cole today. 101 years old. The only surviving Doolittle raider. They had a tradition. They had a silver cup made for every raider. And the cups were stored. Actually, they were initially stored at the Air Force Academy with a bottle of, I want to say, whiskey that was distilled in 1896, the year that Doolittle was born. And when it was down to the final 2 guys, they were going to break open the bottle, drink a toast to all those who had gone before. And as each man passed, every year when they got together, they would read his name and they would turn his silver cup over. Well, those darn cadets at the Air Force Academy, they got their hands on that bottle, broke it open and drank it. So fortunately, the company that made it managed to come up with another, and the cups are now in the Air Force Academy at Wright-Patterson. I'm sorry, the Air Force Museum, the National Museum of the United States Air Force at Wright-Patterson. They are not going back to the Academy. They actually broke the bottle open, I want to say, when there were 4 raiders left. They thought, we're not going to wait for 2, let's go with 4. So that's what they did. But Dick Cole is it, the last guy. You can't make this up. When you put all the pieces together, it makes sense to us now because we've heard about it. B-25s taken off from carriers, bombing Japan. Most of them get back to the States. So, you know, we kind of know, we've grown up with this amazing story. But when this was first proposed, this was a suicide mission. When this was first proposed, they didn't anticipate that they could solve all of these problems. When Japan decided her best course of action was to not just go to war with the United States, but go to war with the United States in a way that the entire American nation would be mobilized. The American people would be energized to use all of our knowledge, all of our skill, all of our industrial power, all of our courage, all of our dedication. They had no idea what they were doing. This was the first blow. But when you think about what this led to and how much this inspired the nation, you can't make this up. Any questions? Sir?
So where did the Japanese think that the planes came from? Midway?
They knew it was carriers because they had spotted the carriers. So they knew. And we were lucky that the carriers got out of there unscathed because we could not have afforded to have lost those carriers. But yeah, that Midway is so far from Japan. At that time, nothing had that kind of range. In fact, even a B-29 wouldn't have that range. So the Japanese knew because of the distance and because they had spotted the carriers, logically they deduced that's what had to happen. Sir?
You mentioned earlier that the 500 flight plan. How about these planes?
Oh, yeah.
Along the line behind them, they don't have the 500 flight deck.
Exactly. A flight deck of, like modern carriers, is about 1,000 feet. These carriers were maybe 800. So the lead plane had, I'm sure it was less than 4. So yeah, to take a B-25 that's used to 3,000 feet of runway and have them do that, unbelievable. And I mean, here's the other thing too. All 16 planes, and the weather was bad. And you know, far in advance of what they had anticipated, they all made it. And they all got to where they were supposed to go, and they all successfully bombed their target. So the skill of these guys, and here's, you know, all 80 of these guys had never been in combat. So you go from having never been in combat to this, what could have been a suicide mission, amazing, just amazing.
Had they had carrier practice prior to this mission?
We had 2 carriers, we had 2 B-25s take off from a carrier off of Norfolk just to confirm that it had been done. But the actual Doolittle Raiders, first and only time that was going to happen. And of course, the planes didn't land on the carriers. They were lifted by crane onto the carriers. So this was first time, only time for these guys.
Are any of the planes recovered and restored?
Oh, good question. The only one that was intact was the one that was in Russia. So that probably, knowing the Russians, they probably copied it and made it into a Russian bomber. This is a true story. Later in the war, when we were flying B-29s, which is far and away the most advanced bomber of World War II, a B-29 diverts to Russia and lands intact. So Stalin orders his engineers to replicate the B-29. And you don't do what Stalin says, you wind up, you know, either Siberia or dead or both. So they followed his instructions to the letter. They made an identical B-29, including the plane that they'd gotten their hands on, had battle damage. So it had repairs over shell holes. They did the exact same thing. So the B-29 probably was put into use by the Soviets.
The ordnance on the planes, how many bombs did they?
I know they had 500-pound bombs, and some had incendiaries. I don't know the bomb load. It couldn't have been much. It was, again, when you look at later in the war, when we're sending fleets of B-29s, this was a whole lot of nothing. So it was amazing.
Can you speak to the bomb damage assessment?
Again, they did damage factories. They did start fires. They did kill civilians, which is the reason the Japanese gave for executing the bombers. And they did damage several ships, including, I think it was a significant ship that was in dry dock that they damaged. That's about as accurate as I can remember. But we did damage.
Can you explain the Beacon aircraft that was supposed to be in China?
It crashed on the way.
But what is that for?
Any engineers here want to help me out on this? They had a device that would put off a signal that the B-25s knew the correct frequency, and they would basically be able to follow that signal directly to the field. It's like, what do you call it, TACAN, Bill, that we use now?
ADF is what it was,
Yeah.
automatic direction point.
And then, so they would land in China, and then what?
Once they landed in China, the planes belonged to Chiang Kai-shek. Now, they wouldn't have crews trained, so I'm not sure if some of our guys would have hung out and helped train them, or maybe even spent some time with them. But the concept was that they would now have 16 functional B-25s. We'd help them get trained up, and ultimately, our guys would still come back to the States.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Well, they put blisters. I guess that's like plastic, metal, rubber things that you can fill up with hundreds of gallons of gas inside the fuselage. So because of that, that meant they took a turret out, so you have one less turret and fewer bombs that you can carry. So that's how they accounted to extend the range.
Just a comment, a lady asked about the B-25 still here.
Mhm.
I went through OP-10 training in Berlbert back in '68, and it's not on England proper, but they did have a B-25 on the highway nestled in, and it had a plaque dedicated to, the Doolittle Raiders. This is the plane, I don't know if it was the actual plane or just another one, but
Sure.
I don't know if it's still there.
Wouldn't have been an actual, but every year they have the Doolittle Raiders reunion. I think every year it's been at Wright-Patterson at the National Museum of the Air Force. A couple of years ago, they had more B-25s show up to celebrate it than there were Doolittle Raider B-25s. In other words, they had more than 16 B-25s show up, because there are B-25s still flying. But I can't imagine there's 20. So I think every B-25 that can still fly in the United States showed up for this, because everybody wanted to take part in that.
Off of Interstate 10 between Orlando and Tampa, there's an air museum called Fantasy of Flight. The attention getter that you see as you drive down the road is the tail end of an old DC-3 sticking up out of the ground.
Wow,
But they have an airworthy B-24 there, I saw that.
wow.
And they had B-25 sitting on the tarmac somewhere,
Mhm.
but they weren't flying. That was 24 flew. Saw that.
Wow.
So if they've got them there, and I asked the fella, where do you get the parts for these things? He said, you'd be surprised all over the world.
Oh,
You
sure.
can't find them.
Sure.
So if we can't find them, Smithsonian Air Museum has 2 websites. It has technical drawings for just about every part ever made.
Wow.
He said, our machine shop here is recognized the part today.
Wow. I'll answer you in a second, Jim. I want to mention, while I'm thinking of it, there's a place in Virginia Beach called the Military Aviation Museum. We went up there about a month ago. They have every major fighter from the United States, England, Japan, Germany, our naval fighters, plus a lot of World War I planes. And almost every single one of these planes fly. If you're not going to our air show at Seymour Johnson, which is May 2021, go up there, because that's their World War II weekend, and you'll get to see all these planes flying. Unbelievable. If you love airplanes and you want to do something amazing, you get personal tours, and when you go through the hangars, you're having to crawl under wings because they're all parked on top of each other, and you get to be up close and personal with them. It's quite an experience. I highly recommend it.
Oh, to address the fuel, on
Please.
Marine reporting, they always double the amount of fuel that the plane normally would carry, by putting ladders in the bomb bay and some of the crew areas.
Wow.
I want to ask you about the bomb site. I understand they removed the.
Thank you. Yes, they removed the Norden bomb site because they thought there's a good chance these planes are going to wind up somewhere where the Japanese are going to get their hands on them. So they took out all the Norden bomb sites and gave them like the simplest little, it was like 2 ice cream sticks crossed or something to try to figure out. But they bombed so low that was okay. Because it's like, okay, we're gonna hit this and it's right beneath us, like 2 feet below, not a problem, you know? But thank you, they took out the bomb sites, which is another way of saying to the crew, we're not willing to lose a Norden bomb site, but we're willing to lose you.
Also, in some of my reading, the crew that actually went to Russia and escaped, some of the documentation that's been released out of Russia indicates the fact that the Russians actually orchestrated that.
Oh, they helped them escape?
Escape, but they couldn't come right out and do it at the time because they were not our allies at that time.
And they didn't want to make the Japanese angry. Good point. Thank you for bringing that up. Everybody, up, last one.
When did Jimmy Doolittle die?
Oh, I should know that. I want to say 1968. No?
Much later,
Much later. Okay.
but I don't remember the date.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Judine's going to Google that. Going to Google that real quick. We.
I know several people that met him, and he's a true gentleman.
I have the good fortune to be married to a woman who owns one of the largest aviation art companies in the world. And over our TV in the great room is this very large picture. In fact, it's what year? Died in 1993, was 96 years old. We have this painting hanging over our TV, and it's old enough that it's signed by a bunch of the Doolittle Raiders, including Jimmy Doolittle. So every time I look at that and I think about these guys, you know, it's like, I don't have any problems, you know, compared to these guys and what they accomplished, just absolutely amazing. Remember, in June, we'll be talking about the Battle of Midway, which is the turning point of the Pacific. Very exciting battle. Hopefully, it won't rain, but my track record is such that it probably will. But it's good to know that you can come out anyway. And I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for coming out. Thank you for your interest in our history.